Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with triple-seared whiskey burger. That's right, ever since we posted our Japanese-style triple-seared steak video, which by the way was one of the best steaks I've ever had, I've had lots of people inquiring whether the same technique would work for a burger. Well, I decided to find out. And not to spoil the ending, but the answer is yes. An emphatic yes. And to get started, of course, we're going to need some ground beef. And what I have here is 1 pound I've divided into 2 8-ounce portions. And what we'll do is dampen our hands a little bit with some water so that the meat doesn't stick to our hands when we form it. And we'll take a portion and form it into a ball, and then into a disc, and then into a very smooth, perfectly formed disc that's ideally somewhere between 3/4 and 1 inch thick. All right, I think for this method to work out how we want, we don't really want to go any less thick than that. And once we do have that shape just like we want, I like to take a little bit of water and rub it on the surface, just to make it a little smoother and to get a little better seal, which hopefully helps this grill up even better. And that's it. I went ahead and did that to 2 portions, so I can enjoy one with Michelle. But for the purposes of filming and demonstrating, I'm only going to cook one. So I wanted to mention in case you wondered where the other one went. And then once our burgers are formed, we'll go ahead and wrap those up and transfer those into the fridge until we're ready to grill. Right, for this technique, cold meat works best. And then the only other prep we need to do is pour a splash of whiskey into one bowl, and then some soy sauce into another. And yes, any whiskey and any soy sauce will work, as long as you're using the real stuff. Okay, no low sodium soy sauce. And I don't even think they make fake whiskey, so I think we're okay there. But anyway, once I had that set up, I transferred it onto a tray, so I could bring that outside and do my dipping right next to the grill. Right, in the triple-seared steak video, I went back inside to do that step, and then went back out to the grill, which was fine. I just figured I'd save myself a few steps. And that's it. Once we're ready to make burgers, we'll pull our meat out of the fridge, and we'll drizzle on a little bit of a high-heat oil. And I used avocado oil, because I think I'm cool. And once we've lubricated the surface, we will sprinkle over and gently press on some coarse salt. And yes, we're being very generous. But don't worry, after the first sear, we're going to rinse a lot of this off with the whiskey. So we do sort of need to start with a lot. And no, I have not tested this method yet with regular size salt. So if anybody wants to do that and get back to me, I'd appreciate it. But I was trying to follow the original method as closely as I could. And that's it. Once oiled and salted, our burger's ready to place on our grill, over which should be some extremely, extremely hot coals. Right, for this method, the higher the temperature, the better. And what we'll do is let that sear for 2 minutes before we flip it over. And I ended up doing this like 3 times. And each time I did, once I flipped it over, there was always some kind of small shallow crack in that first side, which I think are those salt crystals intensifying the heat on the surface, which causes a lot of surface tension as it contracts. So don't be surprised if yours splits a little bit like that, since that happened every time I did it. But as you'll see, by the time we're done with all 3 sears, that mysterious crevice will be a distant memory. And then once we've seared that for 2 minutes on each side, we will pull that off the grill, and we will transfer it into our whiskey, where we will carefully turn it over and over for at least a minute, giving it a very thorough bath in that booze. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of that salt's going to get rinsed off, but not too much, since as you'll find out, the final product's perfectly seasoned. And that's it. Once our burger's been thoroughly whiskeyed, we will place it back on the grill, and we'll pour any accumulated whiskey from the plate on the top. And then the second sear is going to be pretty much just like the first. We will do 2 minutes per side. And just in case you missed the triple-seared steak video, what's basically happening here is that we're sort of letting that meat rest and cool between the sears. So what ends up happening, we get a very even, very uniform doneness. So above and beyond the amazing flavor you're going to produce, this is just a fantastic way to cook a burger. And then once we've given that 2 minutes on each side, and our second sear is done, we will pull that off and transfer it into our soy. And yes, I really should be using 2 hands here, since the only way to screw up this easy technique would be to drop your burger on the deck. Oh yeah, the dog will be happy, but you will not. You'll be very, very sad. So be careful. And then just like the whiskey bath, we will flip that back and forth for about a minute, making sure it's well soaked on both sides. And again, that meat is resting and cooling down. and preparing itself for the final sear. So we'll go ahead and place that back on the grates and do just that. And we'll pour those accumulated juices over the top. And just like the other two sears, we'll give one side about 2 minutes before we flip it over and give the other side about the same. And you might have noticed, unlike the steak, I didn't move the burger around during the sears. But on this last one, now that we've developed a very nice crust, if you feel like rotating it or moving it to a hot spot, go ahead. At this point, your burger should be very movable. Oh, and because I decided to call this a whiskey burger, for marketing purposes, and also because I wanted it to sound different than the steak. But anyway, because I called it a whiskey burger, after I had that first side seared and flipped over, I decided to drizzle a little more whiskey over the top from the bowl. And then once that second side was seared for a couple minutes, I flipped it back over to glaze that extra whiskey on while I waited for this to cook to a perfect medium rare. So we will call that extra whiskey drizzle optional, and we'll leave that up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the Richard Blaze of whether your burger needs an extra whiskey glaze. But I didn't think that would cause any problems, and I did want to try to get a little bit of a more pronounced whiskey flavor. And that's it. This last sear should last as long as it needs to last, for your burger to cook as much as you want it to cook, which for me is an internal temp of about 125 to 130, which is where my burger was right here. So I went ahead and pulled that off and headed back inside. And you might be thinking the same thing I was thinking as I walked inside with this, which was, I hope this is as juicy and succulent as it looks. But before we find out, we should let this rest for at least 2-3 minutes, just so those juices inside kind of even out, and don't just squirt all over the place when we bite in. So that's what I did before I served up, on a bun dressed with some garlic aioli, plus some red onions and dill pickles. Since for a burger this rich and savory, that's going to have that little hint of sweetness from the whiskey, I think we need something sharp and acidic and bracing to balance that. But anyway, that's what I went with. And I went ahead and placed that top bun over and prepared myself for the official taste. And that, my friends, you have to admit, looks very, very biteable. So that's what I did. Twice, actually. I mean, I tried to take one bite, but I couldn't. Since this is so over-the-top delicious, it's hard to believe. Except right here I did realize I'd forgotten one very important ingredient. And that's, of course, a nice cold beverage. And I forget if we're allowed to drink beer on camera. So I guess this could be a ginger ale, allegedly. But no matter what beverage you pair this with, you're in for a huge treat. So to answer the most important and obvious question first, yes, the Japanese-style triple-seared steak technique works beautifully for burgers. And whether you decide to do this for a special occasion, or just for one of your regular cookouts, although if you serve these, that would turn that cookout into a special occasion. But anyway, the point is, we tried a new thing with the triple-seared steak, which resulted in us trying a new thing. And that new thing, this new thing, really did turn out tremendously well, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.